Okay, we're trying some new things. We got a 15-second intro on the YouTube channel that we had to wait until it rolled, so I got the cue that I can go. So thank you everyone for joining us today, both online and physically present. It's great to have you all here. This is our fourth EPN that we've done since we've come back from COVID, and it's great to see sort of old friends showing up and renewing acquaintances. So hopefully you've all had a really good chance to sort of like interact at breakfast, and for those of you joining us on the YouTube channel, we welcome you as well. Welcome to the Limits to Growth Revisited topic. Greetings to everyone here in the room and to those joining us remotely and live via YouTube. My name is Jeff Sharp, and I'm the director of the Ohio State School of Environment and Natural Resources. I'm presenting to you from the ancestral and contemporary territory of the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandotte, Ojibwe, and Cherokee peoples. Our school holds great respect for the land and original peoples of the area where the Ohio State University campus is located. The name Ohio itself is derived from the Iroquois Ohio, the Great River. As we strive to honor the resiliency of these tribal nations and recognize the historical contexts that have and continue to affect American Indians, we recognize that we are visitors and hope to become gracious guests that honor Indigenous past, present, and future. As we addressed at our EPN breakfast last month, our school recognizes that this acknowledgement is only a small step in assuming the responsibilities and obligations of being settlers in this land that include research, reflection, and developing relationships of reciprocity with Indigenous peoples. We are organizing resources and activities to develop reciprocity and connections with Indigenous peoples and tribes positively. November is Native American Heritage Month, which was created to honor the remarkable Native Americans who have contributed to the improvement and character of the United States. Also referred to as the American Indian and Alaska Native Heritage Month, November is the time to rejoice in diverse and rich cultures, histories, and traditions, and to appreciate the great contributions of the Native Americans. Our school and Ohio State University broadly are organizing resources and activities to develop reciprocity and connections with Indigenous peoples and tribes. To learn more, I encourage you to consider viewing the resources at your table compiled by the EPN. Take a photo of the QR code and go directly to the university websites and programs where you can learn more about Native American Heritage Month and more. Later in today's program, I'll share details about a forthcoming EPN feature that will address Indigenous and tribal representation at the recently concluded COP26 negotiations in the UK. Now, moving on to today's program. Raise your hand if you're like me and you've ever asked yourself the question, are humanity's rate of population and economic growth sustainable? I see everyone's hand up. It's amazing how much solid, today was garbage week in my neighborhood in Clintonville, and it's just amazing the amount of waste we toss out, and it's just sort of like, where is all this coming from and where's it going? I assume eventually we'll be mining the dumps, and so that'll help us. But anyway, the point is today we're going to be revisiting this topic and looking at how our planet could be endowed with enough natural resources to support 8 billion people with increasing consumer preferences and lifestyles. Today, we will hear from experts in these subject areas as we connect global questions of resource consumption and sustainability to very local questions of growth and development sourced from here in Central Ohio. Gaya Herrington will give us the global picture through a virtual presentation from her home near Washington, D.C., and Sandy Doyle-Ahern, who is with us here in the room, will connect these broader topics to the greater Columbus area. Please review the bios for each of our speakers located in the program brochure at your table, including for today's moderator, Josh Knights. I've known Josh for many years, and I'm delighted that he's joined us at Ohio State University. I can't think of anyone here who's more qualified or skilled at helping us navigate these sustainability questions. As his bio demonstrates, Josh has spent his career working to balance economic and population growth and improve social well-being with environment and natural resource quality enhancements and conservation. I want to give a special thank you to the Sustainability Institute at Ohio State University, where Josh serves as their Director of Partnerships, as well as the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences, and the individuals listed in your program who, through their program registration, chose to sponsor a student for today's EPN activities. Please take a few minutes to review today's individual sponsors. These contributions ensure that all students can participate and eat breakfast with us this morning at no cost. Thanks to those individual sponsors. Just so we know, those of you that are students, could you raise your hand? Thank you very much for joining us, and those that are environmental professionals sitting at those tables, we really appreciate you networking with these students. It's wonderful. Some of you are actually probably students that are graduates that are maybe alumni of coming to the EPN, so we're great to have had this tradition for many years, and thank you for those of you that helped us sponsor this. So I'm so excited to get to the main program today. for today's speakers. To get things started, please welcome Josh Knights.
So Jeff's raised the bar pretty high for me. I apparently am the only person qualified to do this role, and on the program it also says I've guaranteed you a lively and dynamic conversation, so I hope we can deliver on all those things. So good morning, I'm Josh Knights. I'm Director of Partnerships for the Sustainability Institute at Ohio State, and I've got the pleasure of moderating this morning's EPN breakfast on Limits to Growth Revisited. So the Sustainability Institute, if you don't know, was formed in 2019. Our mission is to leverage all of the university assets around research, student learning, campus stewardship to help build a more sustainable and resilient future for all. And you can learn a little bit more about our work at si.osu.edu. So we're doing a lot of audience participation. Going to do one more show of hands. How many of you have read or have heard of Isaac Asimov's Foundation series? Not a lot, but I'm pleased to know that Gene has. Well, it was written some time ago. So for those of you who haven't been exposed to this work of science fiction, the books follow the collapse of a galactic empire and the rise of a group of scientists as heroes that serve as the cornerstone of the new empire. So this really should be required reading for all faculty. Those scientists are placed at one corner of the galaxy by a mathematician named Harry Seldon, who predicts the future of large populations using statistics and a new mathematical sociology. So he foresees a dark age lasting 30,000 years unless the imminent fall of this galactic empire can be buffered by the technology pioneered by a group of scientists that comprise this foundation. And this will shorten the period of society's collapse. About 25 years after the publication of Asimov's series, a study led by MIT simulated the consequences here on Earth of exponential economic and population growth worldwide based on a finite supply of resources. And those researchers also pioneered some methodologies using computers to develop a world model in which the variables of population growth, food, pollution, industrial output, and natural resources interact. Their 1972 report found that without significant changes in terms of current trends in resource consumption, there would be an abrupt and uncontrollable decline in both population and industrial capacity. And Gene, you were probably how old at that point in time? 16, of course. So now many of us have heard the saying that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So exactly how useful is a 1972 simulation on limits to growth to the world today? What would a current data check of its findings reveal, and what warnings might it hold still for humanity, especially as we as a species struggle to make progress on big global challenges like climate change? Perhaps equally of interest to those of us living in Central Ohio, are there lessons from a global model that can actually be applied here locally? As the 2020 census found, Columbus is in the midst of sizzling growth. It was one of only 14 cities nationwide to add more than 100,000 residents, and it experienced the largest population growth of any city in the Midwest. Now, with this growth comes demands for more housing, infrastructure, schools, and other human services. Do we have the capacity to accommodate this growth and its consequences? Or put another way, can we have our cake and eat it too? So those are a few of the easy questions that our two speakers today are going to tackle as part of this conversation. From my position at the Sustainability Institute, I'm hopeful that we'll hear a lot about sustainability and resilience as part of their responses. So we're going to start off with the publication that rekindled the discussion over that MIT report from 1972, Limits to Growth. It was written by Gaya Herrington, the Director of Sustainability for KPMG US, Gaya holds a master's degree in sustainability from Harvard and a bachelor's in econometrics from the Liberal University of Amsterdam. She decided to embark on this data check of the Limits to Growth report, and she shared her findings in an article that appeared in the Journal of Industrial Ecology. Now, we asked Gaya to provide an overview of her work and findings, and she kindly shared with us a video from a recent meeting of the Security and Sustainability Forum that we're going to show you to provide you some of the key takeaways from her work. Gaya is then going to join us live for the panel discussion after Sandy's opening remarks. So we're going to go ahead and run the video now.
So basically, we're going to talk today about first on a global level, and then Olaf and Karim are going to funnel down towards more local impact. But let's start big. We had this model of the world with a couple of variables that all interact. System dynamics model is one where all the variables interact. Everything is endogenous. There are no exogenous variables. Because in a system, a lot of this is often what happens. So you don't have this neat one-on-one relationship. Everything impacts everything. And also things that are hard to quantify, like social impacts, have enormous influence in the system, but they're hard to model because they're hard to quantify. And so this is system dynamics is something where variables can interact with each other, and the variables can be they can be financial, economic, but also environmental and social. So in this case, what we had was, you can see it here on the screen, we had variables for natural resources, population, food production, pollution production, industrial output, and human services, which are mostly defined in this study as access to education and health services. And so they ran with that model several scenarios. So these are on your screen. You see the output for the 4 scenarios that I used in my study. And BAU stands for business as usual. So this scenario was run with the model that had as input, the underlying assumptions were all based on historical averages. So how we did in the past, we were going to continue in the future. Business as usual 2 was the same, but they assumed twice the amount of natural resources, because the estimates for example, fossil resources is notoriously uncertain. Then there's the comprehensive technology on the left lower side that assumes unprecedentedly high technological innovation and distribution, meaning also to people who do not have the money to pay for it. And then there was the stabilized world. This assumed that people would very consciously move resources away from industrial production towards human services and pollution abatement. Now, what was the outcome? When they ran this, you can see at the bottom on the horizontal axis that they ran it until the end of this century. And what they concluded is that business as usual shows a stark decline somewhere about within the next decade. So in the upcoming few years, we're basically at our peak welfare levels right now, according to this scenario, and we can expect steep declines. They called that a collapse. It was misunderstood at the time as a total die out of humanity. That's not what a collapse is. Just like with a building, when it collapses, there are still going to be remains. It's just not as high as it was before. Comprehensive technology was very optimistic. Like I said, unprecedentedly high technological innovation. But that could mitigate some of the decline, although not entirely. And the only scenario that didn't show any collapse and hardly any declines was the stabilized world. So I thought, given that this was done in the 70s, maybe it's interesting to see how accurate this model actually turned out to be. Because as Ed said, it got a lot of criticism, but ultimately the proof is in the pudding, right? So let's see if it actually did the trick. So I took a couple of decades of data, and I simply took those four scenarios and I plotted it against empirical data. And I like to get from UN entities, the World Bank, all sorts of things, the ecological footprint by Wackernagel, all those things. This on the right screen is one of the graphs that I plotted for each scenario. If you're interested in more in the details, here on the left upper side, it was published in the Journal of Industrial Ecology. The DOI is there, so you can always find it. But this is basically what I found was it's very similar to what you see in this graph. So the purple line is the empirical data. So overall, it's a fairly close alignment to all of the scenarios. That is because they haven't diverged that much yet. They will, as you can see from the others, some show a collapse and some do not. But like I said, it predicted a peak around now. So far, they haven't diverged so much yet. However, there were differences between the scenarios, and also already now. And there was the closest alignment to business as usual to and comprehensive technology. It was least close to the stabilized world. So what does this all mean? This is another variable, human welfare, might be of particular interest to us. Like I said, according to this model, which did show a close alignment with empirical data decades into the future, I studied econometrics. I don't know any econometric model that is this accurate a couple of decades into the future. We are at a now or never moment in history to determine what humankind will look like for the rest of the century. And so we do face a risk of ecosystem collapse, as the business as usual 2 shows a collapse from pollution. So in essence, it's the climate change scenario. The other one, comprehensive technology, sometimes I get people to say, well, we'll probably get in CT, right? I should say that even our current technological innovation rates are nowhere near the assumptions in CT. We have a lot of, obviously, humans are very innovative. It is not limitless. So in a world that has growth at its core, which is what this is, we're always looking to grow our economy. That will not catch up because our innovative capabilities and certainly our abilities to develop and share are not limitless. You will see that industrial output and human welfare does level off for every single scenario. So what this means is that our pursuit of growth will halt one way or another. It is not a matter of will we be able to keep growing our economy or not. The only choice that we have is choose our own limits or have limits forced upon us. For example, by pollution, i.e. climate change, although it's certainly not the only pollution that we're facing. The last key takeaway of this is that the stabilized world shows the highest level of welfare for everyone. But I also think that, and I think that's a very powerful message, CT is hardly the best scenario for us anyway. I think we are not ambitious enough when we go, well, we can probably innovate our way out of this. Apart from the fact that I don't think it's going to work, it is not even the best scenario we want to be in. So we really have to ask ourselves, like, now that we have this enormous power, right? We have power that our ancestors couldn't even dream of. What are we going to do with it? Technology will not save us unless we want to save ourselves, but more accurately, unless we want to save each other, because that's what stabilized worlds is doing. We are consciously shifting our priorities away from industrial output, basically from material consumption, which studies show at this point doesn't make at least the people in the West happier anyway, right? It certainly helps if you're at the poverty level. If you're at the level of probably most people on this call, more income doesn't even make you happier. What does make you happy is if you find that your job has meaning, that you are contributing to society, and that's exactly what we could do with Stabilized World, because that stands for reprioritizing our goals towards human welfare, giving everybody having their basic needs met, giving them access to healthcare, education, all those things. And so if we're looking at COP26, it's not so much about combating climate change, although that's certainly in there. It's not so much about even avoiding collapse, although that certainly would happen if we set a more ambitious goal for ourselves. But ultimately, what we need to do is let go of this continuous pursuit of growth and focus on meeting each other's needs, putting human needs at the heart of our economy. Thank you.
So they didn't trust me to do any of those technical things. So Jeff, apparently I'm not the most qualified person to be doing this. Anyhow, great video. We appreciate Gaya sharing it with us. Her review and updates to this Limits to Growth report are very sobering. It does suggest, if the model is correct, that we remain on a track toward a serious decline, if not a collapse, in human well-being. But mobilizing a response is very difficult. And one of the reasons for this is that it's extremely hard for the average person to relate to a global model with forecasts that may still be decades in the making, depending on what scenario you're looking at. So those of us who have been working on climate change for some time have seen this pattern play out more than once. To the average person, that issue seems to be too big to do anything about. Its impacts are years away, or at least we thought they were. And hey, for some people, more mild winters in Ohio sounds pretty good. But what we've learned is that it is necessary to take a global issue and bring it down to a more personal scale to make it relatable. So to that end, we invited a leader from the Columbus community whose interests span not just business, but also social and environmental causes to make the global to local connection for us. So Sandy Doyle-Ahern is president of EMH&T. It's the largest engineering firm now in Ohio. She's been a volunteer leader for many causes across central Ohio, including the Columbus Partnership, YMCA Columbus, and the Nature Conservancy in Ohio, to name a few. She holds a Master's of Engineering from Miami University and a Bachelor's in Biology from the University of Delaware. And she just may be the biggest Blue Jackets fan you'll ever meet. We did ask Sandy to put into perspective some of the rapid growth that Columbus has been experiencing, what some of the consequences have been and may be for us, and what the community in Columbus is currently doing to make the region more sustainable. We're then going to bring the conversation back full circle when Gaya joins us virtually for a panel discussion. So, Sandy, thanks for joining us.
Good morning. The best part about being here is getting to see old friends I haven't seen in a long time. So good morning. My name is Sandy, as Josh mentioned. Let me give you a little bit of context of kind of why we want to talk a little bit about the Central Ohio region. So it's interesting listening to the model conversation and thinking about that on a global scale can be pretty overwhelming, I think, for probably any of us. So if you kind of draw it down to where we live and work and play every day, let's talk a little bit about what's happening in Central Ohio. So I actually went to Miami University for my master's degree and ended up in Columbus about 30 years ago now. And, you know, Columbus at that time, small town, I'd never really even been familiar with it before I moved out to Ohio. Had a lot happening, but it was, you know, not nearly what it is today. The growth in the region has accelerated tremendously. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. Josh had mentioned a little bit about a statistic regarding the last census, and that is in fact the case. So let it sink in for a second, because it's a very interesting moment. From a census standpoint, which by the way, the 2020 census, I think we all know, is probably not really completely accurate because we know not everybody would have filled it out. But if you take it at face value for just a moment, what it's telling us is that not only is the Central Ohio, Columbus area growing rapidly, but it was the fastest growing region not only in Ohio, but in the Midwest. It's also the fastest growing city in the United States of cities over 1 million. And you got to let that sink in for a second, because that is a game changer for us. We're bigger than San Francisco. It's hard to believe, I think, but you know, if you really pay attention to what it looks like, it is in fact the case. So thinking about that, we have a very pivotal moment, in my opinion, in this region. And the reason that I would say that, I sort of describe us as kind of a petulant teenager. We're like, we want to be an adult. We're ready to be an adult city. We want to act like a big city. And again, when I say city, I want to be clear, Columbus is a big part of that, but it's the region. It's really an 11-county region that we need to be thinking about. And in other ways, we sort of are acting still like a child, you know, and so what do I mean by that? Prior to the pandemic, there was a tremendous amount of focus on what was happening in the region from a transportation standpoint. So all of this economic development, all of the growth that's happening is not an accident. It is 100% by design, and that has been done through Jobs Ohio. It's been done by One Columbus, which used to be Columbus 2020. It was all about economic development and bringing jobs to the region. And so it gained momentum, and it has happened, and it is happening. And I'll talk for a second about the difference between 10 years ago and what's happening today in just a second. So here's the reality of what that really looks like, though. If you think about the region, the growth is not limited here, except by one thing. We don't have the mountains stopping us. We don't have an ocean stopping us. We don't have the Great Lakes. We really don't have anything stopping us except two things: policy, and believe it or not, water and sewer. And we were talking about this a little bit before. You guys might be like, oh my God, you want to talk about water and sewer. But you have to understand that growth in the area really is directly connected to our ability to get water to people, okay? So just bear with me on this for a second. What's happening then is, as a result of our limitations being not so much geographic as opposed to natural resource based, what's stopping or starting or promoting growth, depending on how you want to look at it, really does come down to tapping those natural resources. It's not a land issue. And so what's happened is, back to my transportation point, prior to the pandemic, we were seeing lots and lots of increased traffic. This isn't new. There's nothing happening in this region that hasn't happened a million times over in the world, or certainly in the United States. But we have a region that's very car-centric. We love our vehicles. We don't want to talk about rail. We don't want to talk about passenger anything out in Ohio. We just don't. And so we began to spend a lot of time really thinking about what does that mean, because the more economic development we have, the more growth we have, the more job opportunities, but the bigger the region gets without a whole lot of thinking about how we're going to deal with it. So one of the big challenges that happens is there's incredibly well-meaning people in this community. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of people working really hard to think about how to deal with the growth and how to make it sustainable. But it's tricky, because one of the things that happens in this area, and again, we were talking about this right before we sat down, is that we have independent municipal governments that run the way they want to run within their municipality. They have every right to do that. But what makes it difficult is, even if we have regional plans, those regional plans, unless they're adopted by individual municipalities, make it very difficult for these policy changes to happen. So let me back up a little bit. I know I'm throwing a lot out at you here, but this is what I spend my life doing. So One of the things that's happening right now is we have attracted to the region a lot of tech companies. That was not true 10 years ago. And think about it, 10 years ago wasn't that long ago. But there are now a lot of tech firms coming here, many of which are in the western part of the country, who are looking at Central Ohio for lots of reasons. And part of it is related to, we do have a better cost of living right now. We do have land, lots of it, and we have water, okay? And the water is a really big deal. And so companies that in the past might not have looked at this region are absolutely looking at this region. Google doesn't come to Central Ohio for no reason, okay? And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Google having made a very big presence here, but they absolutely have made a very big presence. And that's beginning to also attract other companies. So kind of back to the point of the models and sort of where we are in the region. One of the things that we have to be very, very mindful about as we think about how to do this well, because I do think we can do it well. I still think we're in a moment where all the right minds coming together and working together can do this. But we have to realize what's happening with our population. So if you look at our state of homelessness right now, our state of poverty in the region, the gap that you might hear about happening in this country in terms of segregation of wealth is absolutely true. You really only need to kind of walk around and understand how difficult it is for people. So we have a situation right now where the cost of living is still very good in Central Ohio. I think most of us know that. The cost of housing is reasonable, but it's beginning to push up higher and higher at a pace that people can't keep up with. So one of the things you've got to understand about doing anything related to environmental sustainability is that it relates to people. Now, truthfully, I'd rather do much for animals than people, if I'm being really honest. I really love animals. But you have to think about people, because in the world where we have lots more tech jobs coming, think about what that takes. You have to have an education. You have to understand how to do this work. We have a population of people that want to be able to do that work, but we've got to connect workforce development, which means education. We've got to have a place for people to live, which means housing. We've got to have a way for them to get there, which is some kind of transportation ability. So we have huge opportunity, but what we can't do is just focus on these companies coming and not think about how to actually connect the people who are here with the ability to access those really good jobs, frankly. So, Josh, I'm going to watch my time here. I could go on for a while. I don't want to go over, so just holler when you need me to stop. So one of the things that becomes really important for us to think about is, as we are looking at sustainable practices and policies, that we're doing it with the lens of public policy, at the municipal level, the county level, and the state level. So I'm going to forget about the United States for a second, because it's just too much to tackle. If we're going to really think about Central Ohio, it is looking harder at all the incredible studies that have been done. We are very good at studying this region, I'll have to tell you. We have done housing strategy studies, we have done transportation studies, we have done poverty studies, we've done zip code studies. We have the data. There is no lack of data in this community. What it really comes down to is people willing to work together to implement policies that will affect all of this change. It means money too. We have to understand that all of these kinds of initiatives around transportation and housing can take dollars to do this. So one of Josh's questions to me recently when we talked beforehand was, what are the hopeful points? And I think that's really important. I do actually believe that Central Ohio can do this. And here's why I would say that. We are pretty fortunate, actually, to be in a region where there is a tremendous amount of cooperation between the public officials, the business sector, and the nonprofit sector. I absolutely believe you cannot do this work without all three sectors working together. So what does that really mean? I'm not saying kumbaya and standing on a stage together and locking arms. That's lovely, but it doesn't actually get anything done. What I'm actually talking about is truthfully sitting at the table, stripping bare what we're doing, including in the business sector, and working to improve those opportunities for people together. So it is going to take business leaders getting involved in DEI work, getting involved in uplifting people in poverty, getting involved in making sure that training and workforce development is real time for what we need today, along with the public sector, who clearly is extremely important here because of what I said earlier. You have individual municipal governments. You have to believe we have a problem, to want to fix a problem, And that can be a little tricky if you don't believe that we have a problem. But a lot of the cities do, and they are working pretty well, actually, with private business to try and implement some of these changes. And then the nonprofit sector, and I do want to quickly touch on the nonprofit sector. So we have an incredibly philanthropic community here. It's kind of unbelievable. It's one of the things we hear a lot about this region that isn't necessarily true in all parts of the country. But when I say philanthropy, what I'm really talking about is people using their personal time and treasure to help others, okay? Here's the interesting moment about that in Columbus, though. We have over 12,000 nonprofits. They're amazing. They all want to do good work. They're all trying to raise the same dollars. At the end of the day, though, the work that's being done by the nonprofit community to make sure that people have a place to go if they're homeless, to make sure they have a ride to work if they can't get there, and so forth, isn't sustainable, okay? Because that world is literally living off of raising dollars to make it happen. So we do have to do a better job with connecting public, private, and nonprofit to allow those opportunities so that as we work on more sustainable policies, people have a way to be involved and engaged in workforce development and housing and so forth. So I know I'm throwing a lot out there, but I want to kind of bring it down real time here for us, because that is exactly what's happening in the region. We can do it if we work together, but we have to be pretty honest about what's working and what's not in order for that model to not come completely true. Keep going? So,
That's perfect.
okay. Want me to join you?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Are these on? Looks good. Sandy, that was great. What we really wanted from you, and you delivered, was to bring kind of that model down to a more granular level here in the local community to get a better sense of how does those types of dynamics and all those factors that are in Gaya's model and limits to growth, how do they actually end up playing out on the ground? Gaya, have you joined us? I want to just make sure she is part of the panel discussion as well. Yep.
Hello.
We can hear
Hello.
you. Can you
Hi,
hear
everyone.
us?
Yes.
Great. So I think we may be adding you to the video here in a second. So I'm going to start, Sandy, if it's okay with you, I'm going to start with Gaya with a couple of questions. And what I really want to do is I want to clear the air a little bit about models, because there may be some in the room like me who are a little skeptical about the validity of models. And you actually speak to a few of these critiques in your publication. So I'd like you to elaborate on two in particular. The first is that the original limits to growth model really underestimated the availability and hence the limits posed by natural resources. So why would we think that the rest of the model is sound, number one? And then the second is, as any good economist will tell you, prices should correct for the scarcity of resources and result in substitutions between resources and other technological advances. And again, you address both of these critiques in your article, but for the audience here, you know, again, those skeptics in the audience, I won't point them out, but they're here. Would you just go ahead and kind of respond to those two critiques?
Yeah, great questions. So this model was a systems model. So system dynamics, what you do with that model, it's exactly like you say. It's a completely different mindset even. So I studied econometrics, and I'm well aware of the utility of some predictive models. This is a systems model. So really what the modeler assumes is that we cannot know the future with certainty anyway. And so what you do is then the model is a way to understand the system better, and you create scenarios with that model. And so that answers the questions, well, if we were just to stay on the current path, for example, business as usual, what would happen? What if we, for example, because of price mechanisms, we get more efficient? What would happen then? And so what we get to with that is one of the key things that is very often missed in limits to growth, the S in limits, plural. So yes, we are. We have price correcting via the markets. We have human ingenuity, of course we do. But the thing is, we can innovate ourselves out of one limit, but then you bump into another, and that's exactly what we saw happen. So we had the business as usual was based only on historic averages, and yes, we did innovate ourselves out of that resource scarcity. And then what happened was we bumped into this new limit from pollution, because what happened when we started to dig deeper for fossil resources, for example, and more dispersed deeper with our technology, we created more pollution. And so that's the kind of thing that was already in that sense predicted by limits to growth and was very often missed. A lot of people took that first one that said the limit is here, if business as usual is resource scarcity, and they said that's the prediction of the model. That's not really what the scenario analysis is about. It just shows us what kind of things what happens if we do these kind of things. And in that sense, it seems like it was quite accurate in forecasting what would happen.
Go ahead, Sandy.
So, is this on? Okay, yeah. So I want to kind of take what she just said and bring it to the local level for just a second to give you some examples of what I was talking about and how it might relate. So the comment that was just made about impacting one changes the other, 100% the case, right? Let me tell you a couple things that are happening here as examples of real things that are on the ground occurring where I mentioned public, private, and nonprofit coming together. So 3 examples of things. First is the Rapid 5 project. If any of you are familiar with that, that is an attempt to try to preserve in a very big way our river corridors, because if you really think about from a natural resource standpoint, what do we have to offer? It is in fact those corridors. That is an example of something that's going to take public policy to allow it to happen, private dollars and public dollars to make it happen. But if you think about it for a second, if we can preserve all of our river corridors as a place for people to access and protect natural resources, right out of the gate, we're protecting one of our strongest pieces, our strongest assets. But now combine that with 2 other things that are happening. Again, these are just examples. The Linkus work that's being done right now, LINK and then US. So the Linkus work is around transportation and trying to basically create rapid transit corridors. And what you have to understand about those corridors, it's not just the ability to run down the road quickly in a bus. It's about redeveloping corridors with a rapid transit that is internet connected with redevelopment along those corridors of housing, grocery stores, medical access, daycare facilities, et cetera. Similar thing, corridor development, okay? So we're protecting our natural resources, we're providing a transportation opportunity. In addition to that, the Columbus Promise pretty recently came out. This has been in the works for quite a while. This is a great example of something where there's a huge attempt to try to create an opportunity for students who may not have access right now to a higher education to actually get that education. And so what the Columbus Promise is, it's another opportunity with public-private interface to essentially allow students in the Columbus City schools to go to Columbus State for free. And if you're not aware of this, Columbus State has an arrangement with Ohio State where those students can go to Columbus State for 2 years and then automatically complete their degree at Ohio State. This is huge. I mean, that opportunity for people is massive. And so, again, an effort of lots of different parties to come together. So I just want to mention it quickly because all 3 of those things are really critical along with lots of other initiatives. But one by itself isn't enough. We have to be doing all of these things as the model would show so that we are promoting a sustainable situation across the board. Sorry, you have a question? I interrupted.
No, that's great. This is supposed to be discussion. So Sandy, I do want to pick up on the idea of kind of everything needs to be coming together. We need to be doing all of these things. And Gaya, this is for you too, and thank you for your response to the questions about the model a few seconds ago. So, Sandy, in your remarks, you laid out this challenge that even if we have a regional plan, you know, we're made up of a collection of municipalities and jurisdictions. And, you know, I see the same thing coming out in terms of climate change policy in the United States, where the federal government has been, struggled and indecisive about coming forward with a federal policy on climate change, but many states and cities have stepped up with their own kind of attempts to address the issue. So I guess I'm curious to ask both of you, can we get to where we need to be through kind of a half-a-loaf strategy, if you will? So if some regions do what they need to do, but others are more kind of the free rider problem, and they don't do what they need to do, can we still get to where we need to be? Or is it really an all or nothing proposition where everybody's got to be pulling together, which is a much bigger challenge, as you know? So Gaya, maybe let's start with you. Again, I'm not sure if the model kind of allows us to look at this, but what are your thoughts in terms of, if some people do the right thing in terms of recycling or address their greenhouse gas emissions, or more to the point, adopt policies that are going to change trajectory that they're on, is that enough, or does everybody have to be in this rowing together?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, there's several aspects to that. One of the things that I think is actually the most valid criticism of the model is that it's a global one. So it doesn't have a distribution factor in there. And I think Sandy made a very good point about rising inequalities, because if you look at kind of system dynamics, you see that as long as you pursue growth, for some reason, inequalities tend to increase over time. There's this very persistent notion that, well, but that you need growth to grow out of poverty, and we just don't see that happen. We have now empirical study after empirical study showing that trickle-down economics is just not there. Actually, it's a good theory. It would be great if it exists, but it's just not there. So there is definitely this issue of how do we make this growth inclusive? Because it's not automatic, as it turns out. We need policy for that. And I think that's one of the key issues. I think it's very important to keep the systems lens in that sense when you're talking about how do we transform our economy, because that's what it's going to take. We really have to change almost everything about how we meet our needs today. So we need transformational change. And for that, you need to work at the structures. So government has a very important part in that. And of course, academia has a very important role in informing government. And of course, they need to work together very much with business, who have a lot of power. So those are all things that Sandy already addressed and that are absolutely pivotal. So I will say that whenever people bring up the individual responsibility, I get kind of irky, because it is a complete fallacy to think that we can make these changes by recycling. I recycle. I think we should all do it, but it's not going to save the planet, to put it simplistically. We need systemic changes, and for that we need new policies. We need new growth models, new ways of, like I said, meeting our needs. And I think that's the kind of thing what you want to be focusing on. And again, the thing with inequality is that it kind of erodes social trust, the social fabric. That's a challenge, because we need to work together. Most people, the majority of people, want system change. Recent surveys show that even in the US, about 3 out of 4 people want not just way more action from government against climate change, but they want the economic system to change. They're like, something's not right here. It doesn't really work for everyone. So the key there, instead of focusing on what the individual can do, is actually how do we come together and demand that those changes are actually implemented.
Gaya, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm glad that Ty Marsh from our Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio, who oversees our recycling programs in the region, is not in the room to hear your comments about recycling. But Sandy, thoughts from you in terms of, like, how do we, we are just a collection of many different people. I mean, I'll use recycling as an example. In our household, we can't agree what's recyclable. My wife thinks there's more things that are recyclable coffee cups, and she gets mad. She says, you're an environmentalist. You're the worst recycler I've ever met because I keep picking stuff out of the recycling bin that she keeps trying to put in because she's an aspirational recycler, but it contaminates the recycling stream. And we're a household of 3. You know, imagine trying to do this across a region or across the country. So Sandy, what are your thoughts in terms of working together?
So I'm not gonna talk about recycling, but I'm gonna frame it maybe this way, and this may not sit well with everybody, but I'll tell you what my experience has been. I spend a lot of time, and a lot of years of my life working with people in poverty. And I will tell you that most people who live in poverty are not what you think. You might think they're standing on a street corner begging for this or that. That is not the case. These are people who are working, who have good jobs, sometimes not great jobs, working 3 jobs, whatever their case might be. And so here's why do I bring that up? Because I've been doing this for a long time, I've been an advocate for housing, affordable housing, for years and years and years. And you can't do affordable housing if you don't have market rate housing, okay? So without dragging you into the entire housing spectrum, the reason I give you that example is this. I learned a lesson a long time ago about how to talk about that. And I realized my reason for talking about it is because I worry about these people. I worry about the kids. I see my own kids and think, my God, how lucky my kids are compared to what I've seen. And so when I would talk about it, I could tell it would resonate with some people and not with others. And what I quickly learned a few years ago is that if I really want to get anything done around this, I have to frame the conversation not around people and what's happening to them, but around economic development. So in other words, if we don't have housing, we don't have a place for people to live, we can't create workforce. And so the shifting narrative around that, truthfully, was a little hard for me because, yes, I understand that, but I also worry about people. And so in shifting that narrative, okay, all of a sudden it becomes, well, it's a workforce development problem, so let's really talk about it. But let's go back to what the reality is. You know, we live in a remarkable country, but we're very competitive. Think about what the American dream is. Just work hard and it's all going to happen for you. The reality is that's not the world we live in this country anymore. It's just not. And so we have to decide if we actually care. Do you really care? Do you care about people? Do you care about what happens to other individuals? And I just don't believe, as much as we want to frame policy by ignoring individual people and just thinking about workforce development and creating opportunity, that it's enough. Because to your question, how do you really break down barriers between municipal governments and regional approaches without understanding that it's beyond just simply workforce development? While that may be true, it's so easy to still leave people behind. And I would challenge us to care, to literally care. And if you don't care about what happens to other people, it is very easy to live in a bubble. It's so easy in this community. You don't have to ever see the problems. You don't have to go anywhere where there are problems. And you can think life is just, you know, grand. And so I still believe in my heart that as much as you have to frame the argument for sustainability around doing the right thing, that you have to realize who you're impacting by not doing it. And that's just really important to me personally.
Sandy, we need more people like you, obviously, running the show. Yeah. So, but I like this segue into a conversation about economic growth and frankly jobs in the workforce, because we have seen a seismic shift in the United States just in the past few months in terms of millions of workers quitting their jobs. 4.3 million in August, 4.4 million in September alone. And I think some of them are quitting maybe because of concerns of the Delta variant coming back, but there seems to be a sense that a lot of people are either looking for a higher paying job and can demand it because of the way the labor market is right now, or maybe in some cases people are looking for something that's a little bit more fulfilling. They're looking for something, maybe it's not even working, some other type of pursuit, some way of giving back to the community, volunteering, all those types of things. That's great, and I think that's part of this larger direction we need to go. But to go back to the recycling example, we still need people to pick up our trash. I mean, maybe some people feel that's a very rewarding job, but I think a lot of people that do that do it because, you know, maybe the benefits, solid pay, those types of things. So I'm just kind of curious, you know, how you view this I mean, we still need people. I mean, we're experiencing these supply chain shortages right now. We still need people to fill essential roles, whether or not they feel that that is a meaningful avocation for them. So I'm just kind of curious, how do we get from where we are now, especially given the economic system we have in the United States, and the need for people to, obviously earn a livelihood to put basics on the table, to a place where, maybe people can be engaged more and caring more about people, following their passion more, maybe volunteering more, those types of things. And Sandy, maybe we'll start with you, and then Gaya will go to you.
Well, I mean, at risk of getting myself kicked out, I guess to me it's not about choice. I have choice. Maybe a lot of people in this room have choice. You don't like your job, you quit and go do something else. That is not true for a huge portion of the population of this country. You don't have choice. You're trying to make ends meet. And so if you're trying to make ends meet, you're in a very difficult situation, but to either deal with what's in front of you, take the job that's available to you, or you're going to push back because minimum wage is so desperately low. And that's what you have happening. I mean, to say that people are leaving the workforce because they just don't feel like showing up or they're afraid of COVID, I don't buy it. I just don't. Now, let's be realistic about what that means. If you don't have options, look at Appalachia, look at Southern Ohio. There aren't a lot of choices there. So what are we doing to create workforce opportunity for people that coal mining really isn't an option for anymore? So I think you have to think differently than to just think that people are choosing to not be in the workforce. I just don't think that's the case. Now, there is some. The other thing that you have to understand, too, about workforce is there are a lot of women who haven't returned to the workforce, and I'm trying not to get too far into another matter, but it's the truth. A lot of women haven't returned to the workforce because there's no childcare. So if you don't have childcare, a lot of daycare centers close. Again, what are we doing to reopen daycares? How are we supporting that? You can't have workforce without providing the resources people need to go to work. It's all interrelated, and I think it's back to Gaya's original point. You can't just look at one of these things. You have to look at the web of things that interrelate and really understand when we make policy change, how it pushes one place and pulls another.
That's great, Sandy. Yeah, no, I agree. That is a true limit to growth. Gaya, what are your thoughts on this in terms of this big shift we're seeing in the workforce? What do you think it means? What do you think it holds? And what kind of gaps does it leave behind if people are moving around or can't re-enter the workforce, as Sandy was just suggesting, because of lack of childcare and other restrictions?
Right. I mean, the childcare is a major thing. Yeah? That's a side note, but I'm from Europe, so and I actually just had a baby half a year ago, and it's just astonishing to me. I got 3 months from KPMG, which is a lot in this country, and then it was, I would say, barely enough, and to recover. And so we're underutilizing about the enormous capabilities of about half the population in this country. It's really just that simple, because a lot of women don't even have 3 months. I would say it's the minimum. Everything went well with me, so I'm not even talking about what if someone had complications, to recover and just go back to work. And so you're literally incentivizing women who have children, which is kind of the driving force in keeping this country going, I would say, to new citizens, and women just get so little support. And then some politicians are like, why aren't these women having more children? It's pretty obvious if you look at the incentives that this economy creates. I think there was a study, I think 1 or 2 years ago, actually, about people who evaluated the utility of their own jobs. Interestingly enough, the people who basically responded, I'm pretty sure my job has zero real value, and I highly doubt it. Those two, that was about 20% of people. People picked up trash were not amongst that. They were mostly, for example, people who actually made decent livings, marketing executives, for example. Those kind of people said, I do this for the money. I don't really see it adding real value to society. So I think to answer your question, maybe this pandemic has really made a lot of us think and reevaluate what is really important in my life. So we've always been, I think, kind of starving for meaning in the higher income countries. At least those of us who are not struggling to make ends meet. But I think the pandemic just kicked that even into a higher gear, where we're thinking, what has real meaning in my life? And I think that's exactly right what you said, that people are just looking for a job which has more meaning. And I think in that sense, going back to my study about, why our economic framework is really about people. It's a social science. It's not, there's a lot of math in there to make it look like it's more of a natural science. But it's all people. Ultimately, it all comes down to interactions between people. Even the natural resources and the machinery, right? That kind of capital, it's made by humans and it's used by humans. The stocks and flows only change because of human action. So economy is very much the social science. It's our construct. And so why would we put something as unambitious as growth at its core? Why, if we say, well, we want to have meaning and we want to meet human needs, why don't we just put that as goal? And then you would have these, I think there would be a transformational effect from that. Once the goal of our economy is no longer growth, but meeting human needs, all the jobs, theoretically, that would result from that have meaning.
And Gaya, I think we've seen a little of this with Business Roundtable, statements by business leaders like Jamie Dimon, talking about the need to shift just from purely focusing on shareholders to other stakeholders like the communities they serve, like customers, like employees. So we're going to shift to audience questions.
And interestingly enough,
sorry, Gaya, go ahead.
Interestingly, just want to point out, those companies that do that, they do not show lower growth, by the way. Just because you don't pursue growth as your prime goal does not mean that you can't be profitable, just as a side note.
Yes, I agree. Actually, my sustainability mutual fund has done very, very well. Investing tips, you also get those from EPN. Okay, so we're going to do one final questions and then segue here. And Sandy and Gaya, I'm going to ask you to be super brief on this response, just a couple of sentences. But this was a question that we got from a student group called Sustains. And Sandy, you may be familiar with them. Gaya, Sustains is a learning community for students at Ohio State. They can be from any major, so it's not just environmental or sustainability majors. I've met one person who was sports medicine, for example. But they all share a passion for sustainability. They live together. They work on a project together. They talk about sustainability issues. The School of Environment and Natural Resources and the Sustainability Institute co-administer this group. And they had an opportunity, Guy, to watch your presentation. They had an in-depth discussion about the findings. And so they wanted to pose a question. And so I'd like to hear a response from both of you. We'll start with Gaya and then Sandy. So students, this is the question. Students often hear how they will be able to create change once they start their careers, but the urgency of the issues we are dealing with right now suggests that they shouldn't wait to take action. So in a couple of sentences, what can students start doing today to help address these issues? So Gaya, we'll start with you.
I'm so sorry, because I'm not sure.
Do you need me to repeat the question?
I heard the question correctly.
So students often are told
what would suggest that they should wait?
No. So students are often told, yes, I think you get the gist. So students are often told that, once they get into their careers, they can kind of pursue and make a difference in the world. But a lot of the students recognize that these issues can't wait. So what can students be doing now, in the here and now, to address some of these issues? What advice would you give a student if you were in the room talking to one of the students we have here? But in a couple of sentences. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was just about to say, I'm like, no, I don't think we can wait. Yes. So your young and you just graduated or something, and you're not at the high decision making level yet. And so what can you do? I think there's it honestly, it really depends on your personality, I would say, because we need to, like I said, we need to change almost everything about the way we meet our needs today. So there's ample opportunity at every single level. And it also depends on what suits you. For example, I'm not really the activistic person. I don't go out on the street and protest, even though I do recognize that's probably, we need those voices as well. So it very much depends on your personality first and foremost. I can say what I've been doing is typically, one of the best ways is probably to not go at it alone. So you see this happening a lot. Students organizations throughout history actually have been pivotal in a lot of social transformations. It typically comes from the students. So if you feel like something needs to happen and it needs to happen now, you can bind together, brainstorm, and together as a united front, go to the people, to the nice person with the power and say, hey, we need your help with this.
Gaya, thank you. That's helpful. Obviously, in Europe, a couple of sentences means something a little bit different, but that was a very good response. Sandy, a couple sentences from you?
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you exactly what I tell my 20 and 18-year-old kids. My job is to change policy. Their job and their place in life is to change hearts and minds. I think the students have more ability in that moment to spend time with other people to change hearts and minds around why sustainability and equity matter. My job is to use the influence and place that I've earned to change policy.
That's great. Joe, I'm sorry, we've really eaten into the audience questions a little bit, but we're going to hand things over to you.
Thank you. So we've had a tremendous response on YouTube so far, lots of comments and questions. I'm just going to select one, and it's from a participant named Tree Biology, who writes, has there ever been an example of where voluntary zoning guidelines work?
Where they work? Is that what your question is? Voluntary? There's no such thing as a voluntary zoning guideline. Dorothy knows. I mean, zoning is all about public policy and setting priorities. And so, no, I don't think voluntary zoning works. I think you have to have zoning policies that create sustainability.
So, Sandy, I do want to commend you for your interest in those in poverty. My last two books have been about how zoning has been abused to punish those in poverty. So that resonates very much with me. I'm sitting here with my good friend Sean Logan, who back when we were both in the Ohio House were on the Farmland Preservation Task Force. That was coming up next year is 25 years. If that report had been adopted, we wouldn't be sitting here because everything that you're talking about would already have been accomplished. So the realtors are the fourth largest PAC in Ohio. The home builders are the fifth largest PAC, and the road contractors are the eighth largest PAC. How do we get the stuff you're talking about done in a pay-to-play state, in a pay-to-play country, and frankly, in a pay-to-play world? How do we get this done?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. Again, at risk of getting myself kicked out, look, I think it's very difficult. I think it goes back to what I was commenting on yesterday, just a moment ago. I think you have to care enough about it because you're absolutely right. What I said a moment ago, we are incredibly good at studying things. We're so good at it. There's more studies around that are sitting on the shelf and no one's implementing them. And you have to really ask yourself, why? Why do we do all these studies if no one's willing to be brave enough to put up the policies? Yeah, so you're talking about money. It's a money thing. You also, I think our political leaders have to be brave enough to risk not getting reelected to be willing to make change. And I just don't see that happening very often at all.
Gaya, were you able to hear the... Sorry.
But then we got to stop gerrymandering.
Gaya, we're really venturing into some interesting territory over here in Columbus. Were you able to hear the question that was posed about kind of reports that have been done in the past and the disconnect between that vision and those reports and the fact that we are kind of a pay-to-play community?
I think I got it. I heard him say, ask repeatedly, how do we get this done? Which is a good question. What kind of, I did not hear the thing about disconnect. Could you repeat that?
Well, I made that part up, but essentially he started off by talking about a report that had been done years ago, but had a vision for the region, and obviously that vision wasn't implemented. And I think part of the challenge is, we live in a pay-to-play community, and it's very hard to get things done. I mean, everything from politics to economic development decisions, all sorts of things are basically determined by who's willing to put the money forward versus making decisions based on, to Sandy's point, what the right thing to do is, even if at the end of the day you end up, losing your job as an elected official or whatever the case may be. I think what we're talking about in some respects is just the issue of courage and being able to buck the current system a little bit.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's very true. I think courage is a very important quality, and I agree. I think one of the key, more philosophical things the message of limits to growth is that we have to become and act maturely. I think my half-year-old daughter is very much still focused in this "look what I can do" phase of growing, and it makes total sense for her phase. And we're still kind of acting like that. It was also mentioned at the COP26, right, by Boris, that we're acting like a bunch of adolescents a little bit. We have to be more mature, and what it comes down to is this very, I hate to sound like Dr. Phil, but we have to get real in the sense that it's not going to be easy. When this Limits to Growth report came out, we could have made a smooth transition if we had heeded that message towards a more sustainable society, and that opportunity is gone. We really are in this now or never moment in history, and the things that we do this upcoming decade will determine the future of humanity. So that's a bit daunting, but I think that is the reality that we live in. Technology, like I said, will not save us unless we have to do this ourselves. That's hard work, and it's going to be frustrated, and it's not going to be easy, and sometimes you will be disappointed, and then you have to do it anyway. That's what being an adult is about.
Yep.
So you like I said, you have to bind together, and but yeah, sorry, you're right. You said a couple of sentences, so I go too far, but yeah, I think that's in the end what you have to do it anyway.
We are so glad you were here to share your thoughts with us, Gaya. Thank you so much. And just, it's to your point that you said during the video, it's a now or never moment. And to what Sandy's said during her remarks, we need to act like adults to seize that moment. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much to Gaya and Sandy for sharing her thoughts with us, and we're going to transition to Jeff.
We're going to do one more.
I think we have
Oh,
one more
I'm
question.
sorry. Okay. Yep.
No problem.
We have one more question. I apologize.
Yeah, and thank you so much for all of you for bringing this conversation, especially here in Columbus. I think it's important to add when we revisit old models of the past, to contextualize, one, that it is 3.5 billion people that make up 10% of our global emissions, while the richest 10% make up 50%. And also contextualize, when looking at these past models and looking at the work of philosophers and sci-fi writers, that oftentimes these models were paired with racist ideologies like eugenics. So, rather than thinking of a common frame that's often used of white saviorism, using goodwill to try and lift those in poverty out of need, I'm wondering what can be done to reframe our systems of economic valuation that center and amplify those who are actually the most affected by climate change.
Yeah, okay, so it's a great question, and we could spend an hour talking about this. So the comment that I made earlier about caring, I'm not talking about caring because you're a nice person. I'm talking about caring because if we don't change what we're doing, that will never change. So to say you care about somebody means to create opportunities for them to succeed? How do we help train people to get to the jobs that exist? How do we ensure that they have a safe place to live? How do we create an opportunity for their children to get a decent education? And so I want to be really clear about what I'm saying. I might care because I care, but caring actually means doing something to create those opportunities to level the playing field. And it's going to take people who actually care about that to make the difference. Otherwise, that formula will never change. Just my opinion.
Gaya, we can give you the final word on this question if you'd like.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned earlier, if you're looking at more of the philosophical works of that sense, there is this, for an example of a new framework that would do that. You know, that puts those questions that this person asked at the heart is called donut economic. It's a new framework proposed for the 21st century by Professor Kate Raworth. And there are cities in the world that have started to implement this. So what this means in practice at your level, at the local level, depends very much on the municipality, of course. But for example, Amsterdam City has just adopted this new framework of donut economics where they just put those questions at the heart. They're like, that's what we need to do as government. That's our purpose. So that's something that you could look into. And I think that's ultimately, that's the kind of questions that you should be asking and that you should find together with the community on to work on.
All right, thank you again. We're going to turn things back to Jeff.
Great. Thanks, Gaya, Sandy, Josh, for your remarks and participation today. As is our tradition, we have certificates of appreciation for both of you, for all of you, and Gaya will send one to you via mail. This is a token of appreciation. One thing I love about the EPN is just discovering sort of new things, and I have to say today, we're so blessed, Sandy, for you and our community. It's wonderful to have people that are thinking about these type of issues in such a deep way, and I think one of the discoveries I feel every time I do an EPN program is just learning of somebody that's really working hard on the issues that we care about. I would also say if you're an EADS or EPDM student, you might want to step up and introduce yourself and just network with her, because I think she's somebody that really has got a good vision, and I know, Joe, that we actually need to probably record her lecture just to sort of like present to our ENR 3500 and 2500 courses, so thank you very much, Sandy. Please check out the content in your program for details about upcoming EPN events. I've got a few. This is going to be a little bit longer closing, but I wanted to mention at the start of this program, I noted that November is Native American Heritage Month. In the past 2 years, we've hosted several EPN programs on this topic of building off Indigenous knowledge and emerging sustainability and management frameworks that blend traditional knowledge with scientific research. Dr. Michael Charles, a chemical and biomolecular engineer who received his PhD at Ohio State University, connected with the EPN for a 2019 breakfast that explored his experience as an American Indian and sustainability scientist from the Navajo Nation. In that program, he shared how this has shaped his research and professional practices in the STEM fields. This Friday, Kalia Tejas will, with the Ohio Environmental Council, and who's just in the back here that asked the last question, will interview Dr. Charles, who recently served as a representative of the Indigenous Peoples Caucus at the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference in the United Kingdom, on behalf of several tribal organizations. The Indigenous Caucus adopts a strong human rights approach and takes into consideration Indigenous peoples' vulnerabilities to climate change impacts, as well as their valuable contributions to adaptation and mitigation strategies. He'll share his experience and takeaways from COP26 and implications for Indigenous and tribal communities across the world. This unique interview feature will be made available 1 week from today through the EPN's YouTube channel and other media outlets. To receive a notification for when it's available, sign up to join the EPN at epn.osu.edu/join today. The EPN returns to an in-person breakfast programming on December 7th. The professional demand to design, construct, and restore Ohio wetlands and streams continues to grow. Recent legislation and funding support for H2O Ohio are demonstrating that growth in demand at a state level. Effective stream and wetland construction work requires much skill and experience from engineering and environmental science fields to blend the physical, hydrological, chemical, and biological properties of these projects. Of these many skills, live comedy and improvisational experience are usually not among them. But for this program, we're going to be bringing to you a conversation that is going to sort of like rely on some comedy and improv skills to educate and entertain you. So we look forward to this sort of like innovative approach to sort of presenting a topic on water. Following a comedy format modeled after the show, Whose Line Is It Anyway?, our speakers will address and explore the leading edge skills and certifications needed to restore Ohio streams and wetlands. I'm honestly excited to see this, and it's a good group of folks that are willing to try experimenting with this. So
Who's going to be Drew Carey?
I don't know. We'll discover our new talent in a month. I'm excited. Registration details are available at epn.osu.edu. Ohio State seniors, this is also another favorite for those of you that have been traditional sort of attendees at the APN events. We'll have our Ohio State seniors on hand to present their semester-long capstones from this semester during our networking session. These capstone projects are service-based projects placing seniors in partnership with local and regional nonprofit organizations, small businesses, and governments, addressing and offering solutions to various real-world ecosystem restoration and sustainability development opportunities. Last, please note that our January 18th EPN topic area, Connecting the Fields of Finance and Sustainability, was designed to build off the content of this program, where we focus on today, and then we'll bring in experienced professionals who are decarbonizing their company's financial portfolios, setting and measuring sustainability goals through ESG, and creating new forms of green investment. Please save the date, and registration will be open soon. As a final note, we try to make this a zero-waste event. Please be attentive to the receptacles as you go out and dispose of your trash accordingly. It looks like it's going to be a great fall day. We had some great sun here, and the colors are beautiful, so go out and have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us. Thank you.